Have you ever felt the weight of words unspoken? The heaviest goodbye I ever received came wrapped in just 2 words: take care. If this story resonates with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories that explore the depths of human connection and loss. Your support helps me continue sharing these emotional journeys that remind us we're never truly alone in our experiences. The first time I met Daniel, I barely noticed him. He was just another face in the crowded university library, hunched over textbooks with a concentration that bordered on intensity. I'd see him there almost every day, occupying the same corner table by the tall windows where afternoon light spilled across his notebooks. He never spoke, never looked up, just worked with a quiet determination that seemed almost mechanical. I wouldn't have given him a second thought if not for the storm that hit campus that October evening. The library was closing early, and I'd lost track of time. When I finally packed up my things, the rain was coming down in sheets, transforming the pathways into small rivers. I stood under the library's awning, calculating how soaked I'd get on the 15-minute walk to my apartment, when a voice beside me said, "You can share my umbrella if you'd like." It was him, the quiet guy from the corner table. Up close, I noticed the soft brown of his eyes, the slight curl to his dark hair. His voice was deeper than I'd imagined, with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his serious demeanor. "That would be amazing," I replied, surprised by the offer. "I'm Eliza, by the way." "Daniel," he said simply, opening his large black umbrella and holding it carefully so I wouldn't get wet. We walked in silence for several minutes, the sound of rain hitting the umbrella creating a cocoon around us. I felt strangely comfortable in his presence, despite knowing nothing about him. "You're in Professor Harmon's literature class, right?" he finally asked. I looked at him, surprised. "Yeah, how did you know?" A small smile touched his lips. "I've seen you there. You always ask the questions I'm thinking but never say out loud." That walk marked the beginning of what would become the most significant relationship of my life, though I couldn't have known it then. Daniel and I began studying together, first in the library, then in coffee shops, and eventually in each other's apartments. I learned that his quietness wasn't shyness but thoughtfulness. He chose his words carefully, weighing each one before letting it escape his lips. Daniel was studying architecture, and his mind worked in structures and spaces. He saw patterns everywhere, in literature, in music, in the way people moved through the world. When he finally opened up, his observations were so insightful they often left me speechless. He noticed things others missed, including things about me I thought I'd hidden well. "You're afraid of being forgotten," he said one night as we sat on my apartment floor, surrounded by takeout containers and textbooks. "That's why you work so hard to make an impression on everyone you meet." I'd stared at him, feeling exposed yet understood in a way I never had before. "And you're afraid of being remembered incorrectly," I countered. "That's why you say so little." He'd smiled then, a rare full smile that transformed his serious face. "Maybe we balance each other out." Over the months that followed, Daniel became my constant. We never officially dated, our relationship existed in a space beyond conventional labels. We were more than friends but never quite lovers, though there was an undeniable current between us that neither of us acknowledged directly. Instead, we built a connection based on understanding and presence. He became the person I called when good news broke, the shoulder I cried on when my grandmother passed away, the voice of reason when my anxieties spiraled. What I loved most about Daniel was his ability to sit in silence without trying to fill it. In a world that never stopped talking, he created pockets of peace. We could spend entire evenings saying very little, yet I'd leave feeling more connected to him than after hours of conversation with others. "People are afraid of silence," he told me once as we sat on the roof of his apartment building, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "They think if they stop talking, they'll disappear." "And you?" I asked. "I think it's in silence that we find ourselves." By our final year of university, Daniel and I had created a world of our own. We had inside jokes, favorite spots around campus, and a shorthand way of communicating that confused our other friends. I knew the furrow of his brow that meant he was struggling with a design concept. He recognized the tap of my fingers that signaled rising anxiety before a presentation. We moved through each other's lives with an ease that felt both miraculous and inevitable. But there were moments when I'd catch him looking at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, something like longing mixed with resignation. In those moments, I'd feel a flutter of panic, a sense that something precious was slipping through my fingers. But then he'd smile, and the moment would pass, and we'd return to our comfortable rhythm. The changes began so subtly I almost missed them. Daniel became quieter, even for him. He'd stare out windows during our study sessions, his mind clearly elsewhere. When I asked if something was wrong, he'd shake his head and say, "Just tired," but the shadows under his eyes told a different story. He started canceling plans, something he'd never done before. His architectural models grew more abstract, more haunting. One featured a bridge that ended midway across a chasm, beautiful but unsettling in its incompleteness. "What does it represent?" I asked, running my finger along the abrupt edge. "Some journeys can't be finished," he said, not meeting my eyes. I should have pressed harder, should have demanded answers, but I was afraid of pushing him away. Instead, I tried to pull him back to me with memories, reminding him of our adventures, our late-night conversations, our shared dreams for the future. For a while, it seemed to work. We fell back into our familiar patterns. He helped me apply to graduate programs in English literature. I assisted him with his portfolio for architectural firms. We celebrated each acceptance letter, each completed project. But there remained a distance I couldn't cross, a part of him I couldn't reach. The night everything changed was unremarkable at first. We were in my apartment, sharing a pizza and watching a documentary about ancient Roman architecture. Daniel was more animated than he'd been in weeks, pointing out details in the structures, explaining concepts I'd never considered. I remember thinking, he's back. Whatever darkness had taken him has passed. When the documentary ended, we sat talking about our plans after graduation. I was staying in the city for graduate school. Daniel had received offers from firms across the country but hadn't decided which to accept. "I've been thinking about the Seattle offer," he said, his voice carefully neutral. My heart sank. Seattle was across the country. "That's the one with the sustainable design focus, right? You'd be amazing there." He nodded, studying my face. "It would mean leaving, though." "We'd figure it out," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "There's FaceTime, holidays, summer breaks. And it's not like we're—" I stopped, unsure how to define what we were. "Not like we're what?" he asked softly. I looked away. "You know what I mean. We're not together. We're just, us." A silence fell between us, heavier than any we'd shared before. When I finally looked back at him, his expression broke my heart, a mixture of pain and acceptance that made me realize I'd said exactly the wrong thing. "Daniel, I didn't mean." "It's okay," he interrupted, his voice gentle. "You're right. We're not together. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's getting late. I should go." I walked him to the door, a strange panic building in my chest. Something felt final about this goodbye, though I couldn't say why. At the threshold, he turned to me, his eyes searching mine as if memorizing my face. "Eliza," he said, my name sounding like a prayer on his lips. Then he fell silent, the words he wanted to say clearly stuck somewhere between his heart and his mouth. I waited, holding my breath, hoping he would finally say what we'd both been dancing around for years. But instead, he smiled, a smile so full of love and sorrow it nearly brought me to my knees, and said simply, "Take care." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. I stood frozen, those two words echoing in my head. They seemed so ordinary, so casual, the kind of thing you say to an acquaintance, not to someone who has been your world for 3 years. Yet something in the way he'd said them, in the finality of his smile, sent ice through my veins. I called him that night. No answer. I texted. Nothing. By morning, panic had set in, and I rushed to his apartment. His roommate answered, looking confused when I asked for Daniel. He left last night, he said. Packed up everything and said he had to catch an early flight. Something about starting a new job sooner than expected. The world tilted beneath my feet. He left? Without saying goodbye? But he had said goodbye, I realized. Take care had been his goodbye, and I'd been too blind to see it. The weeks that followed were a blur of grief and confusion. Daniel had disappeared from my life as completely as if he'd never existed. His social media accounts were deactivated. His phone number no longer worked. The only proof I had that he'd been real were the photos on my phone and the hollow ache in my chest where he used to be. I threw myself into graduate school, into new friendships, into anything that might fill the Daniel-shaped hole in my life. I dated other people, laughed at parties, built a life that looked successful from the outside. But in quiet moments, his absence would hit me anew, when I saw someone reading one of his favorite books, or when I passed the coffee shop where we'd spent countless hours studying, or when I heard a song he used to hum while working. It was 6 months before I found the letter. I was cleaning out my desk when I discovered it tucked inside an old textbook, a book I hadn't opened since our last study session together. The envelope simply said, Eliza, in his neat, architectural handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it and began to read. Dear Eliza. If you're reading this, I've already gone. I'm sorry for leaving this way. You deserve better, but I couldn't bear to say goodbye to you properly. I'm not sure I would have had the strength to leave if I'd tried. There are things I haven't told you, things I should have shared long ago. The headaches I've been having aren't from stress. The doctors found something in my last scan, a tumor they can't operate on. The treatments might give me more time, but they can't fix what's broken. I didn't tell you because I couldn't stand to see the way you'd look at me, with pity, with fear, with the knowledge of an ending already written. Our time together has been the brightest part of my life, and I couldn't bear to shadow it with my prognosis. I've gone home to be with my family for whatever time I have left. Please don't try to find me. This is my choice, and while it may seem cruel, I believe it's kinder than the alternative. I want you to remember me as I was, not as I will become. You once said I was afraid of being remembered incorrectly. You were right. But more than that, I'm afraid of becoming a burden, of becoming someone you feel obligated to care for rather than someone who brings joy to your life. I love you, Eliza. I have loved you since that rainy day when you shared my umbrella. I should have told you 1,000 times, but the words always seemed inadequate compared to what I felt. And once I knew my time was limited, telling you seemed unfair, a weight I had no right to place on your shoulders. Live your life fully, brilliantly, in all the ways I know you can. Find someone who makes you laugh, who challenges you, who sees all the magnificent parts of you that I've been privileged to witness. Be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include the memory of me. And know that in my silence, in all the things I never said, there was always love. Take care, my dear friend. Take the very best care. Daniel. I read the letter until the words blurred through my tears, until the paper grew damp in my hands, until I had memorized every word, every curve of his handwriting. Then I did the only thing I could do, I respected his wishes. I didn't try to find him, though every cell in my body screamed to go to him, to be with him through whatever came next. Instead, I wrote him letters I never sent, telling him about my days, my thoughts, my heart. I spoke to him in the silence of my room, in the quiet moments between breaths. I lived as fully as I could, honoring his request while carrying him with me. 3 years passed. I completed my master's degree and began teaching at a local community college. I made new friends, dated occasionally, built a life that felt almost whole. The ache of Daniel's absence never fully disappeared, but it changed shape, becoming less sharp, more like the phantom pain of a missing limb, always there but manageable. Then came the email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line simply read, Daniel. My heart stopped when I opened it to find a message from his sister, Hannah. Dear Eliza, it read. Daniel passed away last week. It was peaceful, at home, surrounded by family. Among his belongings, we found a journal addressed to you. He wrote in it almost every day until he no longer could. He asked that I send it to you after he was gone, but only if you wanted it. Please let me know. I sat staring at the screen, unable to breathe, unable to process the finality of those words. Daniel was gone. The possibility of seeing him again, which I'd secretly harbored despite everything, had vanished. Yet here was this unexpected bridge, his thoughts, his words, a part of him preserved. I replied immediately, yes, please. I want to know everything. The journal arrived a week later, a simple black notebook filled with his handwriting. The first entry was dated the day after he left. Dear Eliza, it began. I watched the sunrise this morning and thought of you. You always said sunrise was more honest than sunset, less dramatic but more hopeful. I'm trying to find that hope today. I spent the next week reading his journal, living his final years alongside him through his words. He wrote about his treatments, his good days and bad, his family's care. But mostly, he wrote about memories of our time together, observations about the world he was leaving, and hopes for the life I was living without him. In his final entry, dated just 2 weeks before he died, his handwriting was shaky but still recognizably his. Dear Eliza. The doctors say my time is growing short now. I find I'm not afraid, though I thought I would be. My only regret remains not telling you how I felt when we had time to build something with that knowledge. But I still believe I made the right choice for you, even if it was the hardest one for me. I hope you're happy. I hope you're loved. I hope you still ask the questions everyone else is thinking but afraid to say out loud. Remember what I told you about silence? That it's where we find ourselves? I've found that to be true in these final months. In the quiet spaces between pain and medication, between visitors and sleep, I've found peace with my choices. My love for you exists in that silence, in all the words I never said, in the future we never had, in the space between who we were and who we might have been. It's the purest thing I've known, and it comforts me now. Take care, my Eliza. In the end, those words were never a casual goodbye but my deepest wish for you, to take care of your brilliant mind, your generous heart, your beautiful soul. To take care of the life I couldn't share. Until the stars align in some other lifetime. Daniel. I closed the journal, pressing it to my chest as if I could absorb his words directly into my heart. The grief was fresh again, but alongside it bloomed something unexpected, a profound gratitude for having known him, for having been loved by him, even in silence. That night, I stood on my balcony looking at the stars, thinking about all the things left unsaid between us. But for the first time, the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like presence, like Daniel was somehow there in the quiet, in the spaces between words, in the love that continued despite everything. I realized then that some connections transcend conventional understanding. What Daniel and I shared wasn't diminished by what we never said or did, it was defined by a recognition that went beyond words, beyond physical presence, beyond time itself. 5 years have passed since I received his journal. I keep it on my nightstand and still read from it occasionally, finding new insights in his words, new connections to the person he was. I've built a life I think would make him proud, teaching literature to young minds, writing stories that explore the depths of human connection, loving fully despite the risk of loss. Sometimes, when I'm walking alone on rainy evenings, I imagine sharing an umbrella with him again. Sometimes, in the library where we first met, I feel his presence in the quality of silence among the books. And sometimes, in my